Story 1. I stepped into a river without realizing how deep it was. I was swept off my feet by the current and had to swim for my life. I was in the North Cascade Mountains with no cell reception and was alone. I didn't inform anyone ahead of time about the area I would be in. In my panic in the rushing water, I swam to the bank of the river opposite from where I had started. There was no getting back into that water. I had to hike for 2 hours along the riverbank through the backcountry to find the next actual river crossing. Then I had to hike back to my car for another 2 hours. It took another 30 minutes of driving before I had a cell signal again to let someone know what had happened to me. That was the day I decided I liked living. Honestly, I haven't told many people in my life about this event, now that I think about it. Story 2. My teenage self, my cousin, and my best friend at the time were bored out of our minds in our small town. So we decided to explore an old abandoned warehouse. This place was strange, as if someone had left one day with everything still there. There were many materials and parts. We explored different floors and found ourselves on the second floor in what looked like an inventory room. Shelves were stacked with various items, and the floor was covered in plastic pieces. As we were looking around, we suddenly heard a crunching sound, as if someone was running on the plastic. My friend started laughing hysterically, and I thought she was trying to scare me. I asked her to stop, but she insisted it wasn't her. She was laughing because she was genuinely scared that we weren't alone. My cousin and I began to panic as we continued to hear more of the running noise. We tried to be quiet as we turned back the way we came, but then we heard clearly, "I hear you." At that point, we were in full panic mode, scrambling to escape when we heard, "I see you too." We ran as fast as we could back to my car. We never saw who or what was in there with us, but the experience taught us to avoid such explorations in the future. Looking back, it was probably a squatter wanting us silly teenagers out of their shelter. However, in that moment, we truly believed we were in danger. Story 3. Diagnosed with and fought an aggressive form of cancer, synovial sarcoma, stage 3 at age 16. My blood pressure dropped at an alarming rate, and I was rushed to the intensive care unit, drifting in and out of consciousness. I almost died that Thanksgiving. Story 4. Driving home from work on a deserted road after dark, a car followed me from the grocery store parking lot and tried to run me off the road for 20 miles. With flashing lights, I thought I was going to die. I only escaped when I turned off my lights and sped down a dirt road. Story 5. I was babysitting my 8-month-old niece who had a febrile seizure. At the time, I didn't know what a febrile seizure was. I genuinely thought she was dying. I had never been so scared in my life. Story 6. I was about 19 or 20 when my mom was driving us somewhere one morning and had a seizure. She had experienced smaller seizures for a few months prior, but she could usually tell me when they were about to happen, and she was mostly conscious during those episodes. By the time this incident occurred, those smaller seizures had seemingly stopped and were not severe when they did happen. She was driving me to work when she suddenly turned back around on the road for some reason. I asked her why she turned, and I can't remember her response, but she sounded confused. I sat for a moment, wondering what was happening and if we had forgotten something at home. Moments later, she veered onto the wrong side of the road, heading toward oncoming traffic. I looked over and saw she was having a full-blown seizure, and I immediately panicked. We were going about 55 to 60 miles per hour, again on the wrong side of the road, at a point where I couldn't bring us back over safely. Immediately, I took control of the wheel and decided it was more important to control the vehicle than to try to help her. I couldn't assist her at that moment. I had to make sure we didn't crash. I don't even remember thinking about the other cars. They seemed to move out of the way. I remember trying to scoot over and put my foot on the brake, but due to her positioning, I couldn't reach it. I took the keys out of the ignition. It didn't slow us down, but at least prevented her from accelerating. I also couldn't pull her foot off the gas pedal because she was so stiff. She started drooling, and her face changed colors. I screamed for her to stop, to wake up, repeatedly saying, "Hey, hey, hey," like a parrot, trying to get her to snap out of it, knowing that wasn't how it worked. During her previous seizures, she could at least communicate. Sometimes I found myself just screaming, likely to release the stress. I remember running over some kind of median to try to slow us down, but it didn't work, and later we discovered I had popped a tire doing that. We kept going because there was a guardrail next to us, and with a steep drop-off, I had to stay on the road until we reached a part where I could veer us into a patch of grass. The guardrail was still there, and I had originally planned to scrape the vehicle against it to slow us down, but thankfully the grass brought us to a stop. The story continues, but that is what happened while we were on the road and how I managed to stop the vehicle. I should also mention that I had barely driven at that point, but all my life my mom had taught me what to do if the driver became incapacitated, and that repetitive teaching helped keep us safe. Story 7. As a teenager, before cell phones, a very intoxicated older man followed me to a convenience store. I didn't realize how close he was until he started grabbing me and managed to squeeze my breasts. I somehow managed to get away and ran into the store. I stayed inside where the clerk could see me and waited in view of the clerk until the man walked far away. The store is long gone now, and I hope the clerk is living a good life. That man saved me from serious harm. Story 8. On New Year's Eve 2019, my alcoholic ex-husband barricaded us in the bedroom and beat me for hours. He was intoxicated and fumbling with his gun the whole time, holding it to my head several times. When I finally couldn't take it anymore and thought I was going to die at his hands, I bolted for the back door. It was locked. The seconds I fumbled with the handle trying to unlock it felt like an eternity. He jumped up from the bed to chase me, and when I got the door open, I fell down the 5 or 6 steps on the other side. I fractured my leg. Fortunately, my neighbor was walking into the backyard to see if I wanted to join them as they were partying. When I escaped, he held my dog hostage until another neighbor, who had approached to see what was happening, realized the situation and confronted him with a knife. During their struggle, he ended up stabbing my ex in the side while managing to get the gun away from him. Both of them were arrested that night, but my neighbor's charges were eventually dropped for self-defense. I truly thought I was going to die that night. I was absolutely terrified. Adrenaline was the only reason I was finally able to twist free from his grasp and run for the door. Story 9. I am a registered nurse, and due to a careless and reckless doctor, I was accidentally stuck with a needle. We sent all the appropriate blood work for both the patient and myself. The next day, I received a call informing me that the patient's HIV test was positive. I was terrified. The doctor refused to contact the patient to inform them and request more blood work. I was on HIV medication for 6 weeks until someone finally called the patient, and they came in for retesting. Turned out to be a false positive result, and I was fine. However, those 6 weeks were horrific. Story 10. On a plane waiting to take off during the Las Vegas Music Festival shooting, the pilot made an announcement about an active shooter on the Strip. Helicopters were searching for him, and people were running away in panic, somehow getting onto the runways. We eventually had to deplane, and everyone was watching the same news clips loudly on their phones. This was not even close to the scariest situation during that event, but it is the scariest thing that has happened to me. Story 11. I dated a man, and we became serious quickly. Soon after, he became verbally, mentally, and occasionally physically abusive toward me. I eventually got him to move out, but he stalked me. I obtained a restraining order, moved away, and blocked him on all social media platforms and my cell phone. Fast forward a few years later, he murdered his girlfriend in broad daylight. Story 12. In June last year, I was running on a Sunday morning at 9:30 in broad daylight. On my way back home, I saw a car parked on the corner, facing me. I stopped a little way off because I sensed something wasn't right. The moment I stopped, 2 men got out of the car and chased me. I turned and ran as fast as I could while screaming. It is difficult to run and scream at the same time. I am a decent runner, but they caught me quickly. One grabbed my pants, and the other put his hands around my upper body. I made a scene, screaming, kicking, and fighting. They told me to be quiet, but I continued to make a scene. I ended up being knocked over into the middle of the road. They touched me all over, asking where my phone was. I yelled that I didn't have it. One grabbed my running watch, and when I held onto it, He bit my hand. I had to let go. I saw that one of the men had a gun. Someone else in the car drove up to the scene. The two men got into the car and fled. I was still lying on the ground and spent some time in the hospital. I received extremely strong painkillers, anti-inflammatories, and x-rays. I lost feeling and movement in two of my fingers due to the bite, though they have since returned after extensive physiotherapy. I also suffered a concussion and serious jaw pain, which made it difficult to eat properly for a while. I had to take antiretrovirals for 6 weeks. They were very strong, and I couldn't do much during that time. People did come out to help, but they arrived too late. It happened incredibly quickly. It is important not to dwell on what-if situations, but it can be hard. What if I had run closer and they had gotten me into the car? I probably wouldn't be here now. I struggled to do anything for a while and couldn't leave my house. Eventually, I pushed myself to overcome the mental block, as I knew it would worsen. I forced myself to run down that road again when it was busy. I usually run with others, but I also enjoy running alone. This experience stays with you. I am extremely paranoid now. It's tough. I now carry pepper spray and a stun gun when I run. Story 13. I went to buy some medication while on vacation in the Dominican Republic and was unexpectedly kidnapped on a moped and taken into Haiti. I was then robbed of all my money and left stranded with no phone and no way to communicate, with no one knowing where I was. Fortunately, an elderly woman noticed my struggle and, recognizing that I was clearly out of place, not only called a cab for me but also paid the fare. She was truly a guardian angel. Story 14. I live in Kiev. A few weeks ago, I woke up at 4 a.m. to explosions, which is not unusual, but this time I could hear the drones buzzing right over my head. I live on the 5th floor and didn't have time to go to a shelter, so I just sat in the corridor and prayed. My doors and windows were shaking from the force of the explosions, and I could hear so many of them flying around. I truly thought it would be the night I died. Many people assume that everyone here is most afraid of the bombs, but for me, they are scary but not as frightening as the drones. It's over relatively quickly when they hit, but with drones, you can hear and feel them buzzing around for a target and exploding for hours, and the anxiety is unmatched. Story 15. I went to a friend's house one summer to hang out and use his virtual reality headset. I played it for a while and then turned it off. While we were talking, he pulled out a gun. I stared at the gun, thinking, this is it. My parents are going to get a phone call saying I'm dead. He pulled the trigger and a flame came out. He started laughing when he saw how scared I was. Even though I know now it was a fake gun, it honestly traumatized me. Story 16. I had my first anaphylaxis reaction due to a cleaning agent for a medical procedure a few months ago. I ended up in the hospital, received 2 epinephrine shots, and was observed overnight. I had another anaphylaxis reaction a month later. I was alone and thought I was having a stroke since my reaction was so different from the first one. I administered the epinephrine shot myself, went to the hospital, and was able to go home shortly after since I caught it earlier. Story 17. My daughter was born in my home bathroom at only 25 weeks. They rushed us to the hospital by ambulance. I didn't know I was in labor. She sadly passed away 29 days later. Story 18. I got lost in Colombia and had to hitchhike to reach my destination. I speak no Spanish, and a truck full of armed men pulled over, smiling to pick me up. I got in, thinking that if they were going to kidnap me, they wouldn't have asked me to get into the truck. Story 19. I nearly drowned while swimming at the beach with my friend, who does not swim. I decided to go a little further out because I wanted to swim beyond the edge of the water. When I started to get tired, I began swimming back to shore, but I noticed I wasn't really moving. I decided to drop down to try to touch the seabed and realized there was nothing there. I tried to swim again but found myself moving further out into the ocean. I attempted to go down, hoping to hold my breath and reach the surface, but still could not find the seabed. I realized I was in trouble and yelled out to my friend, but he did not hear me, and by this point I was panicking. I yelled as loud as I could for help. I don't know how fast the lifeguard moved, but I saw him starting to run, and moments later, he was in front of me with a paddleboard, telling me I had gotten caught in a riptide. I had barely any energy left at this point. He told me there was a big wave coming in behind us and asked if I was ready. I promptly said no. The wave crashed over us, and he helped me get to shore. He saved my life, but to this day, I am too afraid to go too far out into the water when I visit the beach. Story 20. Back when I struggled with addiction, my best friend and I were instructed to visit a dealer's house we had never been to before. When we arrived, we walked to the front door, knocked, and the man opened the door, holding a sawed-off shotgun to my face. A couple of years later, he was arrested for robbery and arson. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I am grateful to be sober now. Story 21. Have you ever been the victim of road rage perpetrated by a semi-truck driver on a two-lane highway in the middle of a deserted mountainous area at midnight during a hailstorm? I literally couldn't see 10 feet in front of me. The semi-truck was tailgating me and honking, and there was nowhere to pull over. I admit that I was going about 10 miles per hour under the speed limit because I wasn't suicidal enough to drive 60 through the mountains during a hailstorm in complete darkness. However, this reckless truck driver decided it was a good idea to pull up beside me, driving on the wrong side of the road, and literally tried to drive me off the road and down the side of the mountain. I couldn't pull off anywhere, and there was no phone reception, so I just had to keep going and pray he would leave me alone. He eventually got bored with me and drove away, and I pulled over at the first opportunity one got and just cried. Story 22. Years ago, around midnight, I was on the couch watching Markiplier videos while my oldest sister was doing homework on the other side of the room. I heard a blood-curdling female scream, like the type you hear in movies. I paused the video and took out my earbuds, wondering if the scream was from the video or real life. After a few minutes, I looked over at my sister, who didn't seem scared. I then resumed watching the video, and later on, I heard another scream. I paused the video again and asked my sister if she had heard that too. She was frozen, her hands hovering over the keyboard, and quietly said that she did hear it. We both sat there, not moving, just waiting to listen. Again, there was another scream, but this time the woman was crying, "Oh God, help me." The screaming and crying sounded so close, as if it could be right on our doorstep. I quietly said I was going to call the police and went to the home phone to dial emergency services. I provided them with my information and urged them to hurry. I really didn't want to look outside the window in case I saw something I couldn't unsee. Instead of looking out the front window directly at our doorstep, I took a small peek out another window towards the street. It was all black. No streetlights were on. An hour passed and I heard the woman scream again, mixed with sobs. I called the police again to ask for them to come because I was scared. I should mention that the police station isn't even 10 minutes away from our house. I never heard any sirens, saw any flashing lights, or received a return call. To this day, I have no idea if it was a genuine person in danger or an attempted break-in. Thinking about that day always gives me shivers. Story 23. I was an 18-year-old door gunner when I was shot down on May 5, 1967, in a Huey 1C. I jumped out at about 70 to 100 feet high. The jungle canopy broke a lot of my fall, but when I landed, I broke both ankles. I won't tell you what was going through my mind at that moment. Story 24. When I was 6, my stepdad moved my mother and me to Brooklyn, New York. My mom rode the public bus with me to my new school a few times. I saw a store that I was familiar with, and she thought I was ready to ride it by myself. When the stop came up, the store was closed and had a metal gate on the door. I looked at the bus driver, and my heart was racing because I was so confused. He nodded reassuringly, and I had no choice but to get off. I started walking and thought I would get lost and never be found. I walked the way I thought was right and eventually ended up at the school. I was 6 and from Indiana. It was 1997. Story 25. I was less than 10 feet from a lightning strike. In college, I worked during the summers with a biological research crew, electrofishing and seining streams. One time, while we were electrofishing, a tree literally right next to us had a lightning strike that stripped the bark off the closer side all the way up to 40 to 50 feet, while we were standing in waist-deep water. Story 26. I choked on chocolate on Easter, which annoyed me because I don't usually eat chocolate. It was terrifying as it was melting down my windpipe, and I couldn't get any air into my lungs for about 2 or 3 minutes, which felt like an hour. I can't imagine a worse way to die after experiencing that. I spent half an hour shaking and crying afterward. I've been through some challenges, but that's the first time I genuinely thought I might die. Story 27. I was struck by an extended side view mirror, resulting in multiple fractures on the left side of my face. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital where my jaw and eye socket were rebuilt, and my jaw was wired shut for 7 weeks. I also underwent an emergency tracheotomy and a few outpatient procedures to complete my recovery. Additionally, they had to perform extensive surgery on my face to carry out the necessary repairs. Story 28. Postpartum congestive heart failure. I had just given birth to twins about 2 weeks before. I had trouble breathing and lying on my side, but I attributed it to having a C-section and my body trying to readjust after a difficult pregnancy. One night, I tried to sleep on my back, and it felt like I was suffocating. Couldn't get air into my lungs. I sat up and told my husband that I needed to go to the hospital immediately. Turns out I was in heart failure. They kept me in the hospital for about 2 weeks. I cried the entire time I was there. I was terrified that I would die and leave my husband with our babies all alone, and that he would have to do this without me. I missed my twins so much. They were so little. The thought of them growing up without me scared me deeply. My husband brought them to see me as much as he could, but they were so young, and I didn't want to risk them catching something from the hospital. Fortunately, my heart has returned to nearly normal now, and my cardiologist is very optimistic. I'm still on daily medication, but hopefully will be off them around August. We are very thankful that everything turned out okay, and we are enjoying family life with our nearly 4-month-old twins. Story 29. On a flight with a poor airline, there was an engine failure, smoke in the cabin, and an emergency landing with evacuation slides deployed. I have never been so terrified in my life. Story 30. I almost burned alive in a waterbed. Funny enough, the fumes from the plastic must have been good. I was sleeping through that until my mom pulled me out of bed by my ankle. Story 31. I was robbed 2 years ago at my bus stop. A homeless person slammed my head into the glass walls of the stop, tore my backpack off, and fled with it. My backpack contained my high school Chromebook and AirPods. The school still claims I lost them. Story 32. I don't know about the scariest moment, but someone just tried to open my front door from the outside. My stomach dropped. Story 33. The May 10th, 1996 hailstorm in Big Spring, Texas. My cousin and I were both 16 years old when this happened. We were newly licensed drivers, and the band banquet was only 2 weeks away. If you were in the high school band, this was a bigger deal than even prom. However, that's not the point of the story. The point is that it was just the two of us driving around while she shopped for and borrowed clothes for the banquet. After picking up the last piece of her outfit, I had already rented my tuxedo. We stopped to see a friend of mine to smoke. While we were there, his girlfriend called him, and he came in laughing because her car was being pelted by hail. We had just left her house because my cousin had borrowed a pair of fancy dress gloves from her. So this hailstorm obviously wasn't very far away. Well, we decided we should probably head home since it was coming our way. When we stepped outside, there was a loud rumble like a train, and you couldn't see more than 2 blocks down one direction, while it was clear looking the other way. It was like someone had erected a wall that stretched to the sky. My friend's neighbor was outside. I'm from Texas. We go outside to look when the weather turns strange, staring at this wall, and scream to us, "Hey, do you think that's a tornado?" I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't a tornado. The wind was too still. Anyway, right about that time, it sounded like someone had hit the top of my mom's car with a baseball bat. It wasn't a bat. It was a hailstone easily the size of a softball. That's what the wall was. A giant hailstorm barreling our way. Did we make the smart decision and run back into my friend's house? No, of course not. We were 16 after all. We thought we could stay ahead of it if we drove fast. Spoiler alert, we did not make it home. We made it around the block before it got so bad that we knew we had to find shelter but had nowhere to go. I saw a driveway with a tree on the side from which the hailstorm was coming. I figured that was our best option. The storm came raging at us, and the windows in the car started breaking. I remembered that there was a side cover for a swamp cooler in the back seat. My cousin was driving, so she was in a safer position than I was. I quickly hopped into the back, grabbed the swamp cooler pad, jumped back into the front seat, yelled at her to put her head in my lap, leaned over her, and put the swamp cooler pad over my head. As we lay there, we could only pray. We could also see out the back window of the car, and I swear there was a river of hailstones flowing down the street. Every time a new hailstone hit the river, it exploded like a grenade. Mind you, there was no rain. This river was moving on its own, literally carrying it down the road like a stream. Eventually, it calmed down enough that I was able to sit up and yell at my cousin to drive. All the windows on my side of the car had shattered except for the passenger side window. It had been beaten in so badly that I could hardly sit up straight, but it held the whole time. We were there for maybe 3 minutes in total, but it felt like hours. We didn't know if we were going to live or die that whole time. I had to keep telling my cousin to just drive as she was panicking all the way back to my house. We couldn't believe the devastation we saw that this storm left in its wake. But we were alive, and my mom was so relieved when we finally got home. She didn't care about the car. She only cared that we were okay. So yes, the scariest experience I've ever had that I'm willing to discuss was that hailstorm. 29 years later, and I still get jumpy when they forecast hail. Story 34. Being in lockdown at my high school 15 years ago because someone had shot a police officer a few blocks from our school was shocking. We were in lockdown from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. We weren't allowed to look out the windows, call family, or check for updates online. We didn't learn that it was a threat outside the school until several hours into the lockdown. We thought someone was inside the school with a weapon. I remember the handle to our classroom jiggling, and I was hyperventilating into my friend's shoulder because we thought we were going to die in our 8th grade biology class. Once the threat was explained as being outside the school, our biology teacher made us finish our exam. When we were released that evening, we learned that the man had run back into the house after shooting the police officer, went up to his ex-girlfriend's bedroom and shot himself while sitting on her bed. He had been dead the entire day. It all happened because he, 25, was upset that his ex, 16 or 17, didn't want to stay with him. We learned later that he had come to our school the Friday before with a gun. He was going to shoot her there, but her friends somehow made him leave without brandishing the weapon. This happened in a tiny Midwestern town of 5,000. Unfortunately, it can happen anywhere. I also remember crying because I knew the door at our house was unlocked, and my grandmother, uncle, mother, and infant sister were asleep at home. At one point, we thought there was a random person running around town shooting people. It was chaotic. I was 14, I think. I'm 29 now. Still makes me sick. Edited to add. This occurred towards the end of December, so it got dark early. At some point, we all said, "Forget this." We hear helicopters. We're looking out the window. When we looked outside, we saw 3 to 5 helicopters circling the surrounding neighborhoods with spotlights. The entire area where this event took place was less than 1 square mile. That's a lot of helicopters. It felt apocalyptic. Story 35. I used to fight wildfires. In my 3rd year on the job, I was given the keys to a pump truck. Driving a pump truck on treacherous, recently burned, narrow mountain trails with a truck half full of water, while the sloshing water in the tank threatened to send me down the mountain at a moment's notice, was challenging. Day-to-day work felt intense and made me feel like my life was on edge. One time, I investigated a smoky plume and found a fallen tree that had a lot of smoldering embers in it, and it was spreading quickly. I ran down the mountainside, grabbed my hose, ran back up, and got to work. However, when I blasted one area, it caused a huge branch to fall, and suddenly I was surrounded by flames. I found myself in the center of a massive bonfire. I focused, remembered my training, and managed to get myself out. As I was rolling up my hoses, I thought to myself, never again. Story 36. That brief moment when you rely on something to go right and then realize you no longer have control over your fate. as you've lost that of the all-terrain vehicle. I would say I walked away from it, but I was fortunate to only break my femur and thumb. Story 37. I broke up with a guy after just 6 weeks, and he became extremely volatile when I was 20 while my parents were out of the country, leaving me on my own. He wouldn't stop calling me at work, so I eventually had to turn my phone off. Even my colleagues were concerned about me going home. I drove by my house to see if he was around and found him waiting in a dark alley near my home. I decided to keep driving and stopped around the corner to call a friend who agreed to come and stay with me that night, about 10 to 15 minutes away. After waiting 10 minutes, I drove back home. By the time I parked my car, he was approaching me, leaving me with no time to get inside. He became physically aggressive and smashed my phone. I made a lot of noise to alert the neighbors, but no one intervened. However, it was enough of a deterrent for him to reconsider. He walked away and tried to punch a window out of my car. I got inside the house, switched my SIM card to my old phone, and he continued to call. Then he began making death threats, which prompted me to call the police. They found him at a pub at the end of my road, intoxicated and seemingly planning to return later that night. The police managed to remove him that time. The threats continued, even after my parents returned from their holiday. At that point, my dad intervened and called his father, who was unaware of the situation since his son worked for him in a small business. My dad explained everything and warned him to take control of his son, threatening action regarding his business if the harassment persisted. I never heard from them again. However, it took me a full year before I could see that type of work van without experiencing a racing heart and total fear in case it was him. Story 38. Choking on food can be a terrifying experience, especially when it occurs without any sound. Thankfully, I was with family during that moment. It is alarming to have oxygen cut off so suddenly. Story 39. I visited an old friend in his small Canadian town with a population of only 600. We were roaming the local park at 3 a.m. on the dimly lit dirt path when suddenly an unmarked white van with tinted windows drove onto the pedestrian path, which was not made for vehicles. It slowly drove past us, just 2 feet away, slammed on its brakes, and quickly made a U-turn back toward us. We sprinted back to my friend's house, terrified. That unmarked van followed us all the way back, making every turn. I still think about how scary that moment was. Story 40. At one point, the doctors thought I might have lymphoma. They ran tests and assured me that I would have the results in 48 hours. No one contacted me for 2 weeks, and it was the scariest 2 weeks of my life. I had to confront my thoughts about leaving my young children behind when I was only 24, and during that time, I went back and forth through the stages of acceptance. Honestly, people should only have to go through that once. I do not recommend it. Story 41. I am average looking, with a normal height and weight. When a perfect 10 kept trying to pick me up and convince me to go to her room in a hotel bar, common sense kicked in and told me I was about to get robbed or kidnapped. I exited the situation. Turns out I was probably going to lose a kidney. Story 42. This experience was not terrifying at the time but is in retrospect. The year coordinator for year 11 wanted to talk to me. He brought me into a small office that was always open but had no windows. I walked in, he closed the door, and proceeded to ask me questions about a particular incident where his friend physically assaulted me. He wanted to know why I told my mother about his friend hitting me and also asked, "Are you, one of those sissies?" I erupted at him, verbally tearing into him because I was furious. He had no right to ask me such things, especially since his actual office had windows. Here's the clincher. He wasn't my year coordinator. I was in grade 9. There are so many unanswered questions and enough speculation. I have strong feelings against Catholic schools. I hope they both face consequences for their actions. Story 43. I fell down the stairs holding my 1-month-old daughter. She got a bump on her head, but she is a happy, healthy 11-year-old now. At that moment, I thought I had killed her. It was terrifying. Story 44. My siblings and I witnessed our stepdad assault our mom. They had fought before, but never like that. I was quite young and recall the yelling and screaming. Our mom gathered us to leave, but he followed us. He took the keys from her, threw them, and then started hitting her. We ran back inside. My sister got hit by the door while trying to lock it. We hid upstairs for a while but eventually ended up at a neighbor's house. The police were called, and there was a standoff involving a knife before he was arrested. I had never seen such rage before. It was as if he had turned into a monster. I don't remember many things from my childhood, but I vividly recall so much of that night. Story 45. I was 12 with a MRSA staph infection in my leg, which was double its normal size. They gave me Demerol, which no one knew I was fatally allergic to, and I immediately went into cardiac arrest. I remember seeing my body from the ceiling, watching the doctor and nurses trying to save me. When I came back, I was calling for my incredibly abusive stepdad, which I have no idea why I did that, considering he was abusing me multiple times a month and physically assaulting me. Story 46. I had a baby at 23 weeks gestation, just minutes after the obstetrician on call told me, "They don't always survive at this size. We'll see. She's a thriving, happy 20-month-old now, but she scared us from day one." Story 47. I slipped and fell in my bathroom at 1 a.m. I dislocated my shoulder and cracked some bones in my foot. I genuinely thought I was going to die because it was so painful that I had no energy to get up or even scream. Luckily, the people next door heard the noise and called an ambulance. The scariest part was seeing the bill. Story 48. I was on a trip abroad when the power went out while we were in an elevator. We were rescued within hours, but the electricity returned 5 days later. If they had waited for the electricity to come back to rescue us, we would have been stuck there for 5 days. Story 49. An acid and dextromethorphan experience I had a few months ago. I made a post about it in a few subreddits, but I'm remembering new details about it every day. At the peak, I was experiencing genuine insanity. I remember one time I kept opening my door and entering the same room repeatedly, similar to scenes in horror movies. Obviously, it was in my head, but you get the point. I was terrified that I had died and was in some sort of hell. It was the most frightening experience of my life. I'm grateful to be sober now. Story 50. I surfed at a very dangerous spot, alone, in sub-zero temperatures, and the sun had just set. I had a good surf and wanted just one more. I paddled to where better waves seemed to be breaking and got caught in a rip current. The current started dragging me further out, and it was nearly dark. The water was freezing. The waves were rough and dangerous, and while wearing a thick 5mm wetsuit, I was struggling and becoming exhausted. It was not looking good. Nobody was in the water or on the shore. A pretty monstrous closeout wave came, and there was an 80% chance it would smash me and sap what little energy I had left or I'd manage to catch it, outpace the whitewash, and ride it to the shore. I went for it but failed to outrun the wash and rode straight into a bunch of sharp rocks on the shore. I endured an exhausting few minutes of getting cut and smashed while climbing over the rocks and reaching the beach, exhausted, bleeding, and bruised with a dinged-up board, but alive. Throughout that ordeal, I remembered a story my older brother told me about my mother. He said when my mother was young, before she had us, she visited a fortune teller who accurately predicted how many children she would have and how many children my mother's two sisters would have, and that one day my mother would lose one of her children to the ocean. I still surf. Story 51. My ex-husband contemplated harming me but changed his mind after a local man in the news got caught for a similar act. I actually caught him twirling a butcher knife in the kitchen after yelling at me over something trivial late one night. It was terrifying. Story 52. Working the closing shift at Subway, I witnessed a large number of emergency vehicles rush past, later learning that a small private plane had crashed into a mobile home neighborhood just a few miles up the road. The frightening thought is that if the plane's trajectory had taken it a bit further south, it could have hit either my workplace or the apartments behind it. Rest in peace to the pilot and the two individuals who lost their lives on the ground. My condolences go out to their families and to those whose homes were damaged by the crash and subsequent fire. Story 53. When I was 14, my friend and I were alone at my house and ordered a pizza. After accepting it from the delivery person, I locked the door. Seconds later, the doorknob started turning and rattling. The delivery person was trying to get in. My friend and I stared in shock. We quickly ran around the house to ensure all the doors were locked and then waited for my parents to come home. This was before cell phones. We should have called the police, but we were young and didn't know what to do. Story 54. Several things, none of which I want to repeat. An active shooter was being chased by police. We were out camping, blissfully unaware and sinking ciders. Her mom called, panicked, asking where we were and to get in our tents. She told us the shooter was in the woods behind the field. We had heard sirens in the distance but thought nothing of it. Needless to say, we didn't hide in our non-armored tents and instead ran, full speed, back to the house. My sister and I, when we were kids, were at the beach abroad in one of those figure-8 floats. We were just relaxing and didn't realize how far the tide had taken us out. We got back to shore but couldn't tell how far we had drifted because all the loungers looked the same. We walked to the shops to figure out our way back to where our towels were. We were quite nervous. Eventually, we made our way back, and our mom was a nervous wreck. I nearly died from an infection. All my organs started shutting down, and I have lifelong damage. Honestly, the only reason I don't rank it higher for scare factor is that while going through it, I had no real idea of what was happening. I knew I was ill but was too focused on feeling awful to be scared. I was chased by a bull. I grew up farming and went to retrieve sheep. My brother, not telling me there was an aggressive bull in the field, found it hilarious when I ended up scaling a tree. "I wasn't going to let it get you," he shouted from the safety of the quad bike. I needed a change of trousers. Story 55. I was jogging through a small section of forest near the sports hall. It had gotten a bit dark. It was around 8 p.m. This was a public space, but this area was about 100 meters of forest. There were some lights. A guy passed by, and I felt awkward because he had no dog and gave off a strange vibe. I ran a bit further, then looked back and saw the man was running after me. I started screaming as loud as I could and ran to the closest street as quickly as possible. Fortunately, it worked. He stopped chasing me and ran away in the opposite direction. Story 56. I was 14 or 15 years old and looked it. I was walking to a friend's house a few miles away when a man started following me in his car. I will never forget his face or his car, and it has been over 20 years. He tried to offer me a ride, but I declined. He kept following me, so I ran to a different friend's house and knocked on the door. His mother answered, confused, and I explained that I knew her son. Knew he wasn't there, but I needed to get away. She let me in and waited for the man to leave. I don't know if she called the authorities, but 30 minutes later, she dropped me off where I needed to go. Story 57. I went to the outlets about an hour away from home for the first time to check it out and see if I could find good deals. A few hours in, gunshots started. It was a mass shooting, the scariest and worst day of my life. I never thought that taking a quick Saturday trip to the Allen outlets on May 6, 2023, would change my life forever. Story 58. When I was younger, I was with my best friend at a sand pit with sand dunes. People would come with guns to practice shooting, even though they weren't supposed to. I was on top of a sand dune when they saw me. I suppose they thought I was a deer because they started shooting at me. One guy had his shot lined up on me when I was able to scream for my friend. They realized I was a person, and I, a shaking mess, ran down the dune and away from there. My best friend said she'd be at the nearby creek, but she wasn't there. I started panicking, calling her name, and then broke down sobbing because I thought I was going to die and was alone. It turned out she was just looking for me because she ran over, comforted me, and then we went back to her house. Story 59. The parachute got tangled during my first skydiving experience. Thankfully, the instructor was able to cut it and deploy the backup. We landed safely, but I am forever traumatized. Story 60. I lost a high-paying job while supporting my family with 5 children and an unemployed spouse. Just 4 months after closing on our home, I was terminated due to company cuts. I was devastated by the amount I invested in the home and struggled to find another job that offered a salary close to the 6 figures I was earning, even while working 2 jobs. 3 years later, I went through a divorce and lost the home as well. Story 61. I had Guillain-Barré syndrome, went from feeling fine to paralyzed from the waist down with about 10% strength left in my hands in under 24 hours. I could feel it progressing in real time. I felt a little strange the night before, woke up, and knew something was wrong. My legs were extraordinarily weak, and I had to use my arms to stand up. I took a couple of work calls and had my wife take me to the emergency room. I barely walked in the door, sat in the waiting room, and couldn't stand again. I had the acute motor axonal neuropathy variant, which is kind of rare in North America, so I experienced paralysis and loss of reflexes but no sensory loss. It took 6 weeks of rehabilitation to stand again and about 6 months to where you wouldn't know I had just recovered. Oh, and we were closing on a house the next day and moving. Sitting there, paralyzed, I wondered if the bank would pull the loan because there was no guarantee I would survive this. To answer that question, they had me sign in the hospital room. I could barely hold a pen by that point. It was an interesting experience, needless to say. Story 62. I was a passenger on a plane that landed on an aircraft carrier. I also took off from another aircraft carrier. I survived the San Francisco earthquake in 1989, which was very frightening. Story 63. I was camping with a group of friends in the middle of a forest in Oregon. There was no cell service and the next campsite was a mile away. My friend and I were the only ones still up at the campfire. We heard a loud snap close by. We went into her and her husband's tent. He went outside and there was a cougar right next to my tent. Fortunately, he had a firearm and shot off a round to scare it away. I can't imagine what would have happened if we didn't have the firearm, or worse, if I had gone to my tent. I'm completely terrified of the wilderness now. Also, I was under the influence of a hallucinogenic substance during this, so that was an interesting experience. Story 64. Attempted kidnapping by my grandfather tops the list. I was 9 years old. A close second would be the several instances when I was approached and followed home by adult men in broad daylight while walking home from middle school. They were all different individuals. It stopped when I began to look more like an adult in high school. There is nothing quite like the fear of knowing that someone is willing to use force to get what they want from you, and that there is nothing you can do to stop them. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.